Hello and welcome to Lyra Nara. Today's video marks the second part in our two-part series on Lyme Borreliosis, the epidemic that plagues millions of people. And if you haven't watched the first part yet, please do so. I'm gonna link it in the description box below. In this second part, we're gonna concentrate on how to treat Lyme borreliosis successfully after we've gained a better understanding of what causes it in the first part that we published. So let's not waste any more time. Let's dive right in and learn more about a successful therapy concept for Lyme borreliosis. And we have divided the whole therapy concept up into 6 stages, the first one being the stress stage. While most people cope relatively well with short-term stress, and emphasis here on short-term, there are also many who appear to be highly vulnerable to life stress and traumas and feel unable to cope when life throws a curveball their way. And these people are usually perfectionists and live in fear of conflict, stress, trauma, loss, and are also deeply frightened of negative events. And when faced with a major trauma, this type of individuals, they feel trapped and unable to escape from the memory of the traumatic experience and the painful feelings of anger, hate, resentment, and grief that is associated with their experiences. And these people generate toxic emotions that affect first the sleep patterns due to the depletion of melatonin secretion that they are suffering from. And melatonin is a very important hormone that regulates the circadian rhythm and the sleep patterns. Recently, it was determined that melatonin is also an inhibitor of cancer growth and many infectious developments through the ongoing production of interleukin IL-2, and IL-2 controls the white blood cell activity which prevents microbial infections. Melatonin is also the primary hormone responsible for regulating the immune system, and when there is not enough melatonin, the production of interleukin IL-1 and interleukin IL-2 is diminished. Interleukin-1 protects against infection, and interleukin-2 regulates the activities of white blood cells, including the T cells, the B cells, the neutrophils, the macrophages, and the natural killer cells responsible for overall immunity. So we need to address the stress situation so that we don't get depleted of melatonin for successful Lyme disease therapy. The second thing that we need to address is the acidic tissue. During phase 2, the elevated stress hormone cortisol induces adrenaline and epinephrine depletion. And there are limited reserves of adrenaline in the body, and when an individual is under constant psycho-emotional stress, these reserves are quickly exhausted. While insulin is used to transport glucose into the cells, adrenaline is critical for the mobilization of glycogen out of the liver to supply the glucose necessary to overcome the unexpected stress situation. And thereby adrenaline is also responsible for cellular mitochondrial respiration and for converting glucose into ATP energy. Healthy cell division occurs via the metabolic pathway known as oxidative phosphorylation and via the so-called Krebs citric acid cycle of the mitochondria. And adrenaline stimulating the G protein and GDP molecule is an essential player in mitochondrial cell respiration, glucose conversion according to the Krebs citric acid cycle, and the oxidative phosphorylation metabolic pathway. Without GDP, the cells are forced to ferment glucose. And through fermentation, a lower amount of ATP energy is being created via the process known as glycolysis, which creates lactic acid in the cell and an overall acidic environment. In fermentation, the energy, the ATP energy is 2 instead of the regular ATP at 36 when the Krebs cycle works properly. In 1931, Otto Warburg was awarded a Nobel Prize for Physiology for discovering the mechanism of mitochondrial cell respiration. And this process of fermenting glucose occurs in the cytosol, so the intracellular fluid of the cell, causing a discharge of lactic acid. The discharge of lactic acid within the cell creates a low pH with a highly acidic environment in the tissue. Otto Warburg postulated, quote, "The loss of cellular mitochondrial respiration due to adrenaline depletion and, respectively, oxygen arrest is the cause of cellular mutation toward cancer cells. This is a process of a long struggle of existence by the injured cells to maintain their structure." End quote. A part of the mitochondria perish from this lack of energy, while another part succeed in replacing the irretrievably lost respiration energy by fermentation energy. The problem is only that in fermentation the energy is, as I've mentioned already shortly, only 2 ATP instead of the usual 36 ATP, and therefore Lyme patients and also cancer patients are low in energy and often feel really exhausted. This adrenaline depletion is really problematic because when the fermentation is well developed but not that great that the respiratory defect can be compensated, we may have cells which look like mutated cells, so sick or cancerous cells, but are clinically not damaged enough. Such cells have been found, for example, in prostate, lung, kidney, and stomach of elderly persons. And such cells have been referred to as sleeping cancer cells. These kind of cells are mostly localized in the interstitium, and Dr. Frieda studied in detail adrenaline depletion, and she treated this by administration of dextrorotatory lactic acid to buffer the levorotatory lactic acid resulting from this fermentation. And in this way the body's pH at a normal 7.4 is restored and the patient's health improves right away. A Lyme disease patient always suffers from over-acidification of the tissue. The tissue pH value must be therefore changed from acidic to alkaline. The problem is that this is easier said than done because all alkaline foods lose their intended effect soon after entering the bloodstream, as they are used up in the blood for buffering before they can reach the tissue. The body always endeavors via appropriate regulating mechanisms to maintain the blood pH value at around 7.4, which is essential, of course, for the stability of hormones, in particular of adrenaline. If the blood pH value drops, the tissue pH value rises and vice versa. This means it should be possible to indirectly raise an unhealthy acidic tissue pH by lowering the slightly alkaline blood pH value. Over-acidification of tissue is prevented in a healthy organism by the dextrorotatory lactic acid that is constantly produced by exercising a suitable nutrition. And this indicates that an input of optically dextrorotatory lactic acid would solve this problem. This seems like a contradiction to a layman in that tissue is to be de-acidified by administering an acid. The paradox, however, disappears if all interrelations are kept in mind. Acidification of the blood by means of dextrorotatory lactic acid lowers the blood pH value until both blood and tissue pH reach the same level. During the period from the first until approximately the 4th day in week 6 of this dextrorotatory lactic acid therapy, the acid substances will be discharged from the tissue into the blood, the pH value of which drops for a short time to very low values. The excretion of the pathological substances of the tissue via blood, liver, kidneys and skin during this period is apparent from an entirely pungent and acidic smell. Feeling generally unwell, the patient is also irritable, aggressive and depressed at the same time. At the height of this changeover reaction, that usually lasts only about 3 days, the pH value of tissue and blood reach the same level and you get rid of these unwanted symptoms. The continued supply of dextrorotatory lactic acid finally ensures an unproblematic and physiological restitution and maintenance of a blood pH value of 7.4 and a tissue pH value above that figure. And kidneys and the liver are now capable of carrying out their full detoxification functions. Finally, dextrorotatory lactic acid also causes the biological neutralization of the toxic levorotatory lactic acid into a non-toxic neutral form. And this is of utmost importance as it removes the stimulus for an increase in the cell division rate and also stops the development of Lyme Borreliosis into more cancerous and finally cancerous conditions. Normalizing the acid-alkali balance also stimulates adrenaline production and improves its effectiveness, an equally important precondition for a healthy aerobic metabolism. The therapy introduced here offers relatively great advantages to patients because the changeover reaction that we've discussed of about 3 days, except this changeover reaction, which is a little bit unpleasant, the patients are not subjected to any type of stress. It is neither painful nor does it cause vomiting or loss of appetite or bleeding of the bladder or other similar side effects that are well known from aggressive therapies such as chemo and radiation therapy. It also helps, and it is recommended, that you stop eating carbohydrates and starchy food during this therapy. Increased entry of pyruvate into the mitochondria by either DCA or inhibition of LDH promotes glucose oxidation and also brings about an increased apoptosis and decreased proliferation and tumor growth. If you have watched the first part in this series on Lyme Borreliosis, you are very aware that we've discussed at length somatids and the protozoa. And with that we come to the third thing that we must address for a successful Lyme Borreliosis therapy. During the phase 3 of Lyme Borreliosis, somatids pleomorphize, as we have learned in the first part of this video series, into yeast-like fungus to ferment excess of glucose and lactic acid that is produced and stored in the cells. In a healthy person, the somatids are limited to 3 stages in their life cycle. So they go from somatids to spores and double spores. However, in a highly acidic, low pH created by lactic acid, the somatids biological cycle changes into a 16 stages cycle. And these stages include parasitical bacterial yeast forms, which ferment the excess of glucose and lactic acid in the cell. These pathogenic forms then migrate into the cell nucleus to reproduce, releasing acidic waste that inhibits cell DNA repair and the all-important tumor suppressor genes and immune cell antigens. Without a tumor suppressor genes such as p53 to regulate cell death, also known as apoptosis, when the cell has mutated beyond repair, the cell lives on and cell growth regulating proto-oncogenes turn into oncogenes, causing normal cells to mutate into cancer cells. The trigger of all chronic diseases, including Lyme Borreliosis and cancer, is a shocking, unbearable psycho-emotional event, of course, and this long-term stress further depletes melatonin and adrenaline, which in turn further creates a deep distortion of the metabolic vital Krebs cycle, leading to a fermentation with excessive lactic acid invasion in the tissue. This acidic milieu favorizes awakening of the dormant somatids or protozoa, which undergo different stages, finally penetrating and destroying the DNA and the stem cells. From this stage, Lyme borreliosis shows all symptoms described in many of our previous videos and develops towards all serious conditions such as cancer, MS, ALS, dementia, Parkinson's, etc. I'm gonna link some of our previous videos in the description box below for you. At this stage, all kind of harmful microbes develop from the somatids, so the protozoa, and this explains the multitude of symptoms and co-infections that Lyme borreliosis patients experience. In phase 4, we need to address the niacin deficiency. Because during this phase, the lack of adrenaline causes also a depletion of dopamine in the brain. Adrenaline is made of dopamine, and as more and more dopamine is used up during stress, the amino acid tryptophan creates serotonin to offset the depressed mood. This subsequently results in a depletion of tryptophan, which is needed to synthesize niacin or niacinamide, better known as vitamin B3, which are vital, both are vital for cellular respiration. Niacin is converted by tryptophan into NAD coenzymes, which are subsequently used by the Krebs citric acid cycle in the mitochondria for glucose conversion, cell respiration, and ATP energy. Without tryptophan and niacin, the Krebs citric acid cycle and the oxidative phosphorylation metabolic pathway is broken. In the 1950s, Canadian Dr. Abram Hoffer, Director of Research at the Regina Psychiatric Services Branch at the Department of Public Health in Saskatchewan, Canada, found a treatment where he administered vitamin C and niacin in high doses, oral doses, to patients which were hospitalized with psychiatric disorders. Hoffer observed that while he was trying to treat psychiatric disorders by administering these high doses of vitamin C and niacin, psychiatric patients who had incurable cancer also showed improvements in their cancer condition. Dr. Hoffer subsequently treated cancer patients in his own private practice from 1967 to 2005 using high doses of vitamin C and niacin with a life extension from 5.7 months to over 100 months on average. The same benefits of this intense niacin and vitamin C treatment are supporting also a Lyme borreliosis cure. Because Lyme borreliosis sick patients show a chronic niacin deficiency caused by a chronic tryptophan depletion. It takes 60 milligrams of tryptophan for the liver to synthesize just 1 milligram of niacin in the body. Adrenaline is made by dopamine, as mentioned, and as more and more dopamine is used up during stress, the amino acid tryptophan synthesizes serotonin to offset the depressed mood. This subsequently results in a depletion of serotonin and tryptophan, meaning niacin cannot be created or converted by tryptophan into NAD coenzymes for the Krebs citric acid cycle, which is very crucial for a healthy cell functioning. All tissues in the body convert the absorbed niacin into its main metabolically active form, which is the coenzyme known as nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide, or NAD for short. More than 400 enzymes require NAD or NAD to catalyze reactions in the body, which is more than for any other vitamin-derived coenzyme. NAD is also converted into another active form, the coenzyme called nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate, or NADP for short. And this happens in all tissues except for the skeletal muscle tissues. If this critical glucose converting ATP energy producing factory is shut down, then the cell is forced to ferment, rising glucose levels via the process known as glycolysis to obtain the reduced amounts of ATP energy. During the fifth phase, so the fifth thing that we need to address, the deficient adrenaline causes also ascorbic acid or vitamin C depletion in the adrenal glands. Ascorbic acid is the main ingredient used by dopamine to make noradrenaline, which is then converted to adrenaline. During prolonged chronic stress, more and more adrenaline is pumped out and thus depleted, meaning more and more ascorbic acid is used up in the regeneration of adrenaline. During chronic stress, the adrenal glands also release ascorbic acid into the body to diminish the stressful impact of adrenaline on the heart and blood pressure systems. And ascorbic acid is essential for preventing cell DNA damage caused by oxidative stress, converting oxygen waste products, superoxide and hydrogen peroxide into oxygen and water within the cell mitochondria during the oxidative phosphorylation. The loss of ascorbic acid thereby increases cell mitochondrial DNA damage and induces also cell mutation. Ascorbic acid is an essential nutrient required by the human body for survival. It is a key antioxidant used to break down superoxide and hydrogen peroxide in the mitochondria, also to prevent cell DNA damage, and is also an essential ingredient required by the adrenal glands to produce stress hormones, including norepinephrine and adrenaline. And during prolonged chronic stress, ascorbic acid is used to create norepinephrine or noradrenaline to be converted into epinephrine and adrenaline. Dopamine uses ascorbic acid and oxygen to synthesize the norepinephrine via the pathway known as dopamine beta hydroxylase. And for this reason, there is 100 times more ascorbic acid in the adrenal glands than anywhere else in the body. During prolonged chronic stress, ascorbic acid is also released from the adrenal glands to protect the heart from cardiovascular disorders and arrhythmias. Yet, as the condition of prolonged chronic stress continues for months and years and adrenaline levels are depleted, vitamin C levels are also depleted, as both are inextricably linked. Without an adequate supply of ascorbic acid, superoxide and hydrogen peroxide cannot be broken down into oxygen and water within the cell's mitochondria, and that means that normal healthy cells are more likely to mutate into cancer cells due to the resulting cell DNA damage. Of course, as with any other condition, we need to look at the solution holistically. And that means we also need to look at the psychological part. During this sixth phase, all mentioned symptoms in chronic Lyme borreliosis and the co-infections are exacerbated due to the immune system, which is more and more shutting down due to a subconscious desire of wanting to die. That is caused by elevated levels of the stress hormone cortisol, which depletes serotonin and dopamine levels in the brain, that in turn causes internal depression. An individual experiencing inescapable shock and prolonged chronic stress often feels tired of life and deep down subconsciously wants out of the situation and of this never-ending struggle and pain of life, and therefore the subconsciousness sends subliminal messages to the immune system to shut down. This occurs at a subconscious level, of course, where the immune system receives orders to stop the production of interleukin-2, also the production of T cells, B cells, natural killer cells, macrophages and neutrophils. And while at a conscious level the sick individual has a strong desire to live, it is at a deeper level of the subconscious mind that he or she feels overwhelmed by the pain and the struggle and therefore sends those subliminal thoughts to the immune system to shut down and exit life. Without the intervention of the immune system cells, the viral bacterial yeast-like fungus that have pleomorphized within the cells continue to grow and newly created cancer cells continue to multiply. It is the pathway that explains also why untreated Lyme borreliosis can lead to cancer. This death wish can be very subtle, and often individuals have mixed feelings and do not even realize they have this death wish somewhere subliminally. This awareness indicates that this can be often caused by a rejection of one who was loved. This can be also caused by the loss of a loved one, by a person feeling unloved and unwanted or rejected, and in this kind of attitude, the cancerous condition becomes unstoppable. So your state of mind and feeling during the therapy will decide whether the therapy works or fails, whether you will heal or you will die. The real commander-in-chief is you. If you don't like the fact that a mechanism to take you to your exit has kicked in, connect to the opposite side, which is life. Remember that you have not exited yet, and for as long as there is life within you, you are life itself, so live. Essential is what is in your mind, your desire to heal and to go back to normal life, your personal decisions, and the love, of course, support and care of your loved ones around you. So this is also a point that is often overlooked but is of crucial significance when it comes to a successful therapy. And to understand how you get sick, we'll tell you how you can heal also. You should distance first and foremost yourself from the one-dimensional thinking that cancer or Lyme borreliosis or any other type of chronic disease simply erupts in your body and that your defense mechanisms collapse instantly and therefore you are delivered to your destiny and you cannot do anything about it. Cancer, Lyme borreliosis, all of those chronic conditions, they are systemic conditions and their development history consists of many layers of maldevelopments. The beginning is often in the past and remains unnoticed. Therefore, as long as we do not know the disease history for a specific patient and we did not process and resolve the impact of the biological stress event, we cannot give a correct treatment. Even the goal of eventually conquering the illness by immunological means remains vague for as long as the symptoms history and causes are not understood. And this graph, if you follow our channel, you are very familiar with it, shows you very well how the epigenetic factors, the environmental factors, psycho-emotional events, they all trigger stress and toxic emotions that affect your limbic system, and we can also see that in brain edemas. And this very quickly affects the autonomous nervous system. And within a couple of months, we see then also hormonal dysregulation, such as the adrenaline depletion that we discussed, and the Krebs cycle dysregulation, as well the niacin NAD depletion and the vitamin C depletion. And this, over years, if left unaddressed, leads to chronic conditions such as Lyme borreliosis, cancer, and overall chronic morbidic state. We also, of course, because of this whole development, experience energy blockages, sleeplessness, tiredness. We also see cellular depolarization, the fermentation cycle that we talked about, the tissue acidity, and many symptoms appear due to this. And then when we resolve the underlying conflicts, we can finally go into the healing phase. Our energy recovers and our cells repolarize again. So let's sum it all up and see again what we need to address, all the levels that need to be touched upon to have a successful Lyme borreliosis treatment. So we need first to work on the emotional release. We can do this through sound therapy, EMDR, or the Jaeger code. Then we need to look at melatonin and supplement with 5-HTP, niacin, and vitamin C, as well as dextrorotatory lactic acid. Also, we address the microbial infection with the vivid artemisinin, Herbesso Lymecore, and Herbesso aveni. Then we look at the repolarization and repair of the tissue through galvanic therapy, and we also thereby restore the functionality of the cells and repolarize them because they've become depolarized. And we need also to work, as we've mentioned, on our psycho-emotional level. So getting rid of this desire to die, the subconscious messages that sabotage us. We need to become aware of them and work on our desire to live. If you have any questions about this complex subject, of course, because Lyme disease is a very complex condition. That's what makes it also so difficult and complex to treat. Please do not hesitate to contact us 1-888-773-3196. That is 1-888-773-3196. We will guide you through the whole process. We will answer all of your questions and help you become well again. If you've enjoyed this presentation, please also do not forget to like, share and subscribe. Hit also the notifications button so you don't miss out on the weekly holistic health content that appears on this channel. And with all that being said, stay healthy. Until next time.